Hello and welcome back to the British Food History Podcast. I am your host, Neil Buttery, food historian and chef. Today I am speaking with food historian Peter Ross about eating out in Georgian London. But before we start, just one wee thing. We are halfway through Season 10. So this is just a reminder to send your comments, questions or queries about any of the episodes in the season so far. Since the last Postbag episode, there's also been those specials about Robert Burns and whiskey, so don't forget about those too. But also, if you've got any ideas for future blog posts or podcast episodes, or if you've just got a food history question, or you've cooked up an obscure British recipe, please get in touch. Email me, neil@britishfoodhistory.com. Leave a comment on the YouTube channel, or the Spotify app, or the accompanying blog post, or find me on social media at Neil Buttery on Twitter/X and Blue Sky, or on Instagram and Threads where my handle is Dr. that's Dr_Neil_Buttery. And of course there's the Facebook group, which you can find at facebook.com/groups/British Food History. The links are in the show notes, folks. Season 10 of the British Food History Podcast is sponsored by Netherton Foundry. Netherton Foundry are producers of top-quality British-made cookery equipment. Nestled in rural South Shropshire, Netherton Foundry, headed by Neil and Sue Curry, take inspiration from the local ironmasters of the 18th and 19th centuries to craft traditional cookware from iron, oak and copper using non-toxic materials. Their cookware is built to last, whether it be their famous prospector pans, of which I am a proud owner, or their crumpet rings, or their impressive range of outdoor cookware. Netherton Foundry ships to several countries outside of the UK, including the USA, so why not visit netherton-foundry.co.uk to find out more about their wonderful products, approved not just by me, but by folks such as Tom Parker Bowles, Diana Henry, and Nigella Lawson. Okay, let's get cracking. I am talking with food historian Peter Ross. Peter was until recently the Principal Librarian at the City of London's Guildhall Library. He is a historian of both food and crime in Georgian London. He's also an Art Society lecturer and a Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries. He has also written a fantastic book called Insatiable Appetites, Eating Out in Georgian London, published by the Bodleian Library, published 14th of May 2026, so it's still hot off the press. As you probably know, I love looking at the food and foodways and social history of the Georgian era, so I was really looking forward to this one. In fact, doubly so because Peter and I met in person at the wonderful Guildhall Library in the City of London. We talk about the migrating mealtimes of the Georgian period, chophouses, turtle soup, and why you wouldn't want to be seen hanging around the saloop stand, amongst many other things. Those listening to the Secret Podcast get some top-tier bonus material where Peter and I discuss what Georgian chocolate was really like, and the beautiful and amazing Vauxhall gardens, plus much more. I shall be back at the end, but now please enjoy Eating Out in Georgian London with Peter Ross. Welcome to the podcast, Peter. I'm very excited to talk to you today about your extremely interesting book. I very much enjoyed reading it. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very pleased with how it looks, actually.
Yeah. But actually, before we get started, could you tell listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Peter Ross, and I've been interested in the history of food for almost as long as I can remember. Not sure where it came from. My grandma was a professional cook in Belgravia, a bit like upstairs, downstairs sort of thing. And my grandfather was a butler.
Right.
So I think there's something there. My mum was a really good cook. But the thing that's always interested me about life, really, is ordinary people's lives in the past. That's what I'm really interested in. And the thing that links everybody in the world is food. And when you talk about food, everyone knows what you're talking about. Whether it's unfamiliar or familiar, they know what food is. So discovering food in the past links us to the past. And it's just been something I've been fascinated by and wanted to try out. And it's just turned from a hobby into something that's now a bit of an obsession, I suppose.
Yes, well, likewise.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, this is how you have to get into it, coming from your own direction, your own influences. And what's nice about it, I think, is that because everyone's come from their own direction, and not through a university course or something where you're being spoon-fed, everyone's got shedding a completely different light on the subject. And it's even if it's something you've studied again and again, which I reckoned I had coming into reading your books. Of course, I wrote that book on Elizabeth Raffald.
Yes.
The great 18th century cook.
Yes, very good book too.
Thank you. She's an amazing person.
Yes.
And of course, I had to look a little bit at mealtimes
Yes.
in the Georgian period. And it's a very interesting thing. But before we start talking about that, actually, just to go a little step back, is the Georgian period something you're very interested in? Is that what informed the book, or was it something about mealtimes? How did you spot the gap?
When I was a teenager, I was what you might now call a medievalist. So
Right.
I was a member of the Rich Third Society, and everything medieval was wonderful and romantic.
Yeah.
And very quickly I realised that members of the Rich Third Society were not thinking in the same way I was. They were thinking romantically and and tried to make him a saint. And I stopped being a member of Rich Third Society. And I gradually moved away from medieval things. I did a course, I did an MA. I did a History of Art degree first.
Okay.
Then I did an MA at Birkbeck, which is a wonderful institution in London. And it was on the history of London. And you could opt to specialise in different periods. So I did medieval London and early modern London. And then for my dissertation, I wrote about an 18th century criminal called Jack Sheppard, who I discovered through Daniel Defoe in a very roundabout way. And Daniel Defoe is one of my heroes. And Jack Sheppard was famous for escaping from Newgate prison. And through researching his life, I discovered the Old Bailey Sessions Papers, which are records of trials at the Old Bailey, at what is now the Central Criminal Court. And it's a unique record of ordinary people's lives, because in history, you only get recorded if you've got money.
Yes.
Land and money means you get recorded throughout your life, particularly at your death with a will. Ordinary people, the working classes, the criminal classes, they only get recorded when something goes wrong with their lives.
Okay.
And uniquely, in the Old Bailey Sessions Papers, which were a commercial production, they used to send people in and they used to write down what was said in court. So witnesses, who were ordinary shopkeepers, workers, spoke, and you could hear what they were saying because it was written down, edited. And the criminals too. When I researched Jack Sheppard, I started to spot little links with my other interests, which is food. So it would say something like, while I was on the street at 4 o'clock in the morning when I saw somebody, selling some pies on the corner, and suddenly something happened. And it might say which corner of which street it was, what sort of pie it was. Or somebody would say I was having my breakfast, it was like 8 o'clock in the morning, or I was having my dinner, what time of day it was. I started to see these little references to ordinary people, because most of food history was to do with the wealthy, aristocratic, people who were literate, who wrote diaries, who wrote cookery books, etc. And this was the first time I'd seen the voice of ordinary people talking about food. So I started looking at that. And one of the unique things about working at Guildhall Library is they have the largest collection of records of the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey. So over the 25 years that I worked here, I probably looked at every single one. That's probably tens of thousands of pages looking. And eventually got digitised, which made it, and I was involved with the digitisation, it made it easier to search for the word butter, for instance, which is what I'm sure you've done, and search for the word, and search for any word. And so I started doing that. And because I did History of Art as my first degree, I'm a very, very visual person, so I started looking for as many images of people and food, particularly in London, because Guildhall Library is a library of London history. So this just evolved. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I was asked to do an exhibition on street food in London, which was going to be exhibited in the street. It was set up in 2 places in the City of London on sort of these square box plinths about 8 feet high on street food. And they were printed in colour, and I wrote the text and chose the pictures. And I was thinking, this is really interesting about street food. This is, again, ordinary people's food. So gradually, I think I did spot there's a gap here. Nobody's written about coffee houses, for instance, from the point of view of what the experience was like, how did they work. The obsession with coffee houses has always been around the invention of insurance, The people who were there,
Yes.
and they, you could get the newspaper, you could use it as an office, but I'm not really interested. People have done that research. Mm-hmm. I want to know, what was it like? Where did you sit?
Now, you mentioned that you're quite visual.
Yes.
One thing that I really enjoyed, I really appreciated with the book is how integrated into the text are the pictures, are the images and things like that. So that was obviously something quite important,
Very important
to you.
Yes.
It's nice, isn't it? Because you learn so much. And this is something that I've relatively recently only really started focusing on, I guess, now that I'm writing books rather than just recreating foods. Because that's how I got into these things, just recreating traditional food. So I wasn't looking at pictures, I was just looking at recipes. It took me a long time for some reason to think, oh, hang on a minute, let's look for pictures of what these things look like. But you can pick up lots of exciting clues. One of my favourite cartoons, you can correct me, is it a James Gilray of the two officers, the confectioners?
Yeah, at Kelsey's. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Yes,
fruiterers and confectioners of St James's. Yes,
because you pick up so many clues looking at that picture.
Yes.
I'll post the picture that we're talking about on the blog and social media so that people know. But it really tells you little things about what the consistency of something looks like.
Yes,
especially the syllabubs.
Yes. Well, what's really interesting is that Ivan Day has an original copy of that image on his wall up in the Lake District. I suppose because I have a history of art background right at the beginning, that I do look at images really carefully and look at every single detail. And some of that information I've stolen from Ivan Day, credited to Ivan Day about the sullabub. We can see that it's sullabub because you can see the spoon through the liquid. So it must have separated it out. In that way where the top is the cream and then it separates out into the wine already put in it, etc. So I look at details. I'm really interested. I've become so obsessed. I've started collecting jelly glasses, Georgian jelly glasses. They're quite cheap, actually.
There's a lot around. It's amazing considering how thin they are. A lot of them.
Yeah. And I've started collecting what were called tatzas, or the glass stands, the trays.
Yes.
They've got different names. Nobody can agree on what they were called. And just as an aside, remarkably, where I lived in Epping, I was walking down in the market, which is one of those terrible markets that sells underwear and, you can get batteries for watches. And there's one stand that sells a few knickknacks. And my wife spotted a Georgian cake stand, essentially. And she said, look at that. And I said, grab it. So we grabbed it and I bought it for £7. And it's about 1780 and it's in perfect condition. Those you can see in that image by Gilray. What's fascinating about that Gilray image, it says "from life ad vivum" on it. He lived in the same street as that. That probably is an accurate view of the inside of that shop. And the wonderful thing about satires or cartoons is that they weren't drawn for those details to pass on that information of those details to its audience, but because they drew things to make them look real, we get information that nobody else was drawing. Nobody else was drawing the interior of a confectioner's shop in St James's.
But it had to be something that people would recognise instantly.
Exactly.
So the details have to be there.
Yeah, so although the message might be lost to us now, there's nothing like an old joke, where we can't see the references, really. The amazing details that you can get from... I've looked at thousands of images, lots of them on the British Museum collections, available online, free to download, and just sensationally good.
Your book, Insatiable Appetites, Eating Out in Georgian London. Can we just have a little chat about eating out? These days, it's considered not a thrifty thing to be eating out. But of course, in your book, as we've mentioned, all walks of life are considered. People seem to be eating out a lot in Georgian London, no matter what price point they're at, as we'd say these days. Looking at the working classes, you would think people wouldn't be eating out because it's a false economy eating out. It's going to be expensive. But they seem to be eating out a lot. So why is that?
Okay, so we're looking at a city that's probably one of the densest populated cities in the world. It's one of the biggest, most industrialised cities in the world in the Georgian period. So you've got people crammed in to houses of multiple occupation, rooms of multiple occupation, often with no safe place to store food, which might be nicked, basically.
Yeah.
No place necessary to cook food or even to eat the food. So what you need to think about is cooking at that point. I mean, cooking still costs us in fuel, but if you can't afford to even heat your house, how are you going to afford to cook the food? So there were opportunities to dine out because you could not eat at home. You could eat, obviously, bread and cheese or something like that, but could you store it safely at home? So it seems to be that the what we might call the working classes were eating out, sometimes breakfast, we come to lunch, breakfast and dinner and supper on the streets, a public house, wherever they could get it. It was cheap. You could get cheap fuel, for instance, from cheap calories, though they didn't know calories then. Cheap calories by eating something like shellfish, which is going to give you good sustenance,
Yes.
You could get something as cheap as peas pudding, peas soup, which was very popular. So these people were forced to eat out. The middle classes were probably the ones, and the wealthy, the leisured classes, the moneyed classes, they would be eating out because they were working. They were maybe businessmen, financiers in the City of London. Maybe they only worked till 2:00 in the afternoon. They would need somewhere to eat, possibly in the middle of the day, maybe a bit after work. So they were away from home, significantly away from the servants who were usually cooking their food. So they would go to places to eat, like coffee houses and cook shops, etc. It wasn't a leisurely activity, apart from those people who are members of clubs, maybe they're sort of dining clubs, and the guilds and livery companies who would go to some public dinner, a special dinner somewhere, where they would probably be paying quite a high amount of money. But I don't think people said, let's go out to dinner like we do today. And in fact, when I was growing up, we never went out to dinner. It was too, to eat. It was too expensive for us. It's only in my own lifetime that we quite casually go out and eat. It was. I can remember the 2 or 3 times I went out as a child, but now my children must, they go out quite a lot, to eat, probably too much, So things have changed dramatically.
You've organised your book very sensibly by consecutive meals throughout the day. You don't start with breakfast.
No.
You start with the very, very early morning, where it's sort of leaching into the previous night.
Yes.
And you begin the book talking about particular food stuff, saloop.
Yes.
Which is something that I've looked at, never in a huge amount of detail, so it was very nice to read about it. Could you tell us what saloop was?
Yes. So saloop, I discovered this one first about 20 years ago in the Old Bailey Sessions papers.
Right.
Somebody said there was a saloop stand. I thought, what the hell is a saloop stand? So that's where it started. So saloop is a starchy, hot drink that is made from the ground-up root of a number of orchids, and they are imported dried from what they used to call the Levant, so the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey, Lebanon, etc. And they are nourishing. They're a nourishing, starchy drink. I think that's the key. So you make it by taking the powder and you boil it up either in milk or water, depending what you can afford, really. At its most basic, you might add some sugar. Certainly sugar was getting much cheaper in the late 18th century, being processed in London. You might, if you went to a saloop shop, and they did have a few saloop shops, find somewhere that would add some spices like nutmeg or cinnamon. Yes. On the streets, which is where it was mostly sold, maybe nothing more than the sugar. If you make it, apparently, it thickens. I imagined it thickened like corn flour would thicken something. But in fact, people described it as slightly jellified. And last year, I think it was, my wife, when I went to Athens, where, apart from visiting the Parthenon and everything else, I dragged my wife around loads of grocery shops looking for saloop, and we found some.
Good.
We found some on the bottom shelf of a dark grocery shop, and I bought 100 grams worth because it was 195 euros a kilo.
Right.
And I've had it ever since, and I don't dare make anything with it because I don't know what the origin of it. What if it's not really saloop? Interestingly, saloop does survive in the area it comes from, so in Greece and Turkey and in Egypt. In the winter, you can still buy saloop on the streets of London, streets of Athens and Cairo, for instance. In London, it was sold on the streets early in the morning, even before dawn. it was often sold to people who were coming home from night work
Yeah.
on the way to early work. So soldiers, people who maybe worked walking out to the market gardens, people who had stalls themselves, and particularly to sex workers.
Yes.
And it was a cheap, maybe a penny for half a pint mug. It's difficult to say because lots of people were scamming other people by having small measures. It was hot. Although if you imagine a November morning before it's going to be maybe wet and cold, it was hot and nourishing, and if it had sugar, it would be nice and sweet. So it would warm you up, maybe as a late supper or as an early breakfast. Unfortunately, because of the people who gathered at these saloop stands, where they often had a lamp, there would be a lamp there, because it attracted sex workers and it attracted clients looking for sex workers, it gained a reputation. There's other reasons for that reputation to do with it. Was it an aphrodisiac or something like that? It gained a reputation which meant that you didn't want to be seen drinking saloop out on the streets of London. It's interesting that the people who were saloop sellers were often women themselves. They were doing things at different times of year, saloop in the winter, selling something else in the summer. They were often women who made it at home, so this would be made yourself, and they would have a saloop kettle, which if you imagine a tea urn with a burner under it, that would be what it was like, maybe made of copper, maybe a wheelbarrow, maybe just an old table dragged out to a corner nearby where they lived, where they would start selling at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, so no real paraphernalia required, unusual paraphernalia required. It was all basic stuff.
Some basins, seemed to be drunk from basins, and then some sugar. That's all the basics you'd need.
You find some nice specifics. Sarah Anderson's saloop kettle.
Yeah.
The case of Sarah Anderson.
Yeah, Sarah Anderson was unfortunately coming out. She lived in just to the east of the city. She was coming out early one morning. I think it was 1 o'clock in the morning. Can't quite remember when. Put down her saloop kettle to go back in and lock her lodging door, presumably her room inside. Came out and it was gone, nicked by a man called Levy, who was apprehended quite quickly, tried and was transported to Australia, very early transport. I think he was on the first or second fleet. He didn't steal it for the saloop, he stole it for the metal content. Copper the saloop kettle was worth money. But it just shows you those little snippets of information are there to be found, and digitisation helps that a lot. But I found that one in the Old Bailey Sessions papers 20 years ago, and I saved it.
That's going to come in handy. Moving to the main part of the day.
Yes.
Well, this is where it gets complicated, right? Dinner migrates.
Yes.
And other meals pop up.
Yes.
To fill the gap. When I was writing Elizabeth Raffle book, of course, it's not a book about mealtimes. It was a book about a person. And I remember getting quite bogged down in what was going on with the meals. And I didn't have the time or perhaps the information that you have. You've managed to very cleverly put it together. What's driving this change? Why is dinner moving to... Well, first of all, it's sort of at noontime-ish, and then as you kind of flick through the decades, maybe going to early Victorian period, and if you're in a country house, it could be as late as 9 in the evening.
Yes.
So it really does change. What's going on there?
So I do credit where I got quite a lot of my information. It's from an author called Gilly Lehman, who wrote The British Housewife, a wonderful book where she did lots of research into mealtimes. But if we looked at the early 18th century, and the working classes were always eating their main meal, which was called dinner, in the middle of the day.
Yes.
Maybe they'd have their breakfast 8 o'clock. They would be eating their dinner at 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Some of them even as early as 11 o'clock if they'd started work at 6 or something like that. That doesn't really change for the working classes because they have to have a dinner break at work, and it sticks to being the middle of the day. So what seems to happen is the moneyed leisured classes, particularly the newly emerged merchant classes in London, the middle classes that emerge in the 18th century in London, they start to change what they're doing. So if you think that the working classes are eating at 1 at the latest, then if you don't have to go to work, you can choose to have your dinner a little bit later. So you might see that the Earl of somewhere, you've heard that he has his dinner at 2 o'clock, and you're a merchant and said, I'm going to have my dinner at 2 o'clock. That seems quite fashionable. Yeah. And then so gradually everyone starts to think, let's eat a bit later because we don't have to be like the working classes. We're not forced by circumstance. So then This is a theory, really, and it seems to hold water. Then the aristocratics, the top people, look at the newly emerging middle classes, and they think, well, we've got to be different to them.
Yes.
We can eat it anytime we like, so let's shift it further in the afternoon.
2 o'clock's become vulgar.
Yes, exactly. So let's try 4 o'clock. And then what seems to happen over the 18th century into the early 19th century is the middle classes are chasing the aristocracy, the elite, through the day, down the century, and Jane Austen is brilliant at this. Jane Austen, the greatest novelist ever, in my opinion, with Dickens being the second. Jane Austen so subtly references this in her work that you might miss it, and in her letters. And we can see that just in her lifetime, she was born in 1775, dies in 1817. Just in her lifetime, her own dinner time is shifting from 2 o'clock to like 4 or 5. And interestingly, her brother, who becomes a member of the gentry by inheriting from a distant relative, his dinner becomes really late. It becomes like 7 o'clock in the evening. And I think there's another reason for this as well. You've got to light the rooms you're eating in.
Yes.
So if you're a working class person and you can't even afford to cook at home, you might not be able to actually light your room after 6 o'clock in February.
Yeah.
So get your main meal in the middle of the day. The elite can do anything they like because they're not cooking them themselves. They're paying servants to do it, and they can afford to light their properties. So the theory is, and if we look at things like people like Jane Austen, there was this chasing of meal times. So what happens then, because you might be eating your dinner 5, 6 or 7, what do you do in the middle of the day when you've had your breakfast at 10 or 11, because you're quite posh? You get hungry.
Yes.
So that's when lunch emerges as a middle of the day snack, gradually turns into something slightly bigger. If you're eating at 9, you need something bigger than that. Yeah. So lunch emerges at the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century.
I liked noonings.
Noonings,
as a term. I've not come across that before.
Yeah, noonings, yeah.
There's quite a few definitions of what lunch and lunch is. What kind of things are being eaten for lunch at this point?
Right. So early on in the 18th century, lunch often mean a bit of something. A bit of bread and cheese is the most common. But it seems to be that the bit of bread and cheese was called luncheon, not the time of the day you ate it. So I had a nice luncheon, and it would be 6 o'clock in the evening in the early 18th century.
It's basically like saying snack.
Yeah.
It's how we would say snack now, yes.
And eventually that grows into something slightly bigger, and people start referring to luncheon or lunch as a small meal, sometimes hot, in the middle of the day. If you're expecting to eat your dinner later, maybe because you're away from home. And around the time of Johnson and Boswell, so late 18th century, Boswell is shocked to discover some people at home having a lunch at home, which is like really radical, and they're having some meat. So this shows this evolving meal that develops at that period. And then by the early Victorians, as you mentioned, lunch, and the middle classes start calling it luncheon again. It's like being a bit posh. They think they're being posh by calling it luncheon. But this misunderstanding of what lunch and dinner and supper are has even a split today. I remember we used to have school dinners, and then when I went to senior school, it was actually, we had lunch tickets to get our school dinner. In the north, people are more likely to say tea, aren't they, for a meal in the evening. And I know a friend from Liverpool always says, "What did you have for your tea?" And they mean what I would call dinner, because I eat my dinner in the evening. So there's still this confusion about what these meals are called.
Yes, I remember, and I'm sure people still do this now, at university, having an argument about what the evening meal is called. Is it tea or is it dinner? And of course, it turns out you're talking about two different meals.
Yeah.
So everyone's right.
Yeah, everyone's right.
People don't realise that they're talking about two different things.
I'm from the south, so I'm sorry, it's dinner in the evening.
I mean, it's tea, but anyway.
Yeah.
You name drop a few times in the book, actually, but you do name drop them in the chapter on luncheon. John Farley and Richard Briggs. We should probably mention them because they're quite important people. I must admit, I read Mark Meltonville's book on Richard Briggs quite recently. I knew him as a name, but I'd never really looked at him. But because I'm a big fan of Jane Grigson,
as am I.
I'd come across John Farley quite early on in my self-education of food history. So I always like it when his name pops up, and I like cooking from his cookbook, the art of the London Art of Cookery.
London Art of Cookery, yes,
that's right. Yeah, he's quite a key person when it comes to eating out in Georgian London.
He is. They're both difficult characters because their books are quite famous. John Farley's book probably is the more famous. They're famous because they were sort of celebrity chefs in a way, you might call them now. Farley ran the London Tavern, which was the place, a sort of fine dining for livery companies, etc. I think there's a problem, the problem is that John Farley, if, lots of people are starting to do analysis of the origins of recipes.
Yeah.
So I think the latest figure for John Farley is 90% of his recipes have been stolen from Hannah Glass.
There's a lot of Hannah Glass
Eliza
in there.
Smith,
Yeah.
Other earlier people, anonymous writers early on. And that book was dismissed by some food historians as saying this doesn't represent what he was cooking. This represents him publishing a book to make money.
Right.
I would challenge that because if you start looking at records of people who actually dined at the London Tavern when he was running it, and you can see that there's little articles sometimes published in a paper in London, say a particular guild went and dined there, and occasionally it lists what they had. And it seems to me that they're eating exactly what's in his book. So although he's not a food writer, he's not a recipe creator, a food writer, he was cooking that sort of food that was in his book. It does represent a way of dining, that sort of dining à la française, 2 big courses, with a mixture of dishes. That was being eaten at the London Tavern. It was the only place you could probably eat outside the home. You could eat that sort of 2 big courses because most other places didn't cater for that. They were catering to a sort of business elite to a certain extent, club members.
Yeah.
So I think he is important because it was probably the most famous tavern in London for dining out. His recipes are less important because they've been stolen, but they do reflect what he was cooking. And it's the same with Briggs. Briggs was probably slightly less grand where he was cooking. And I mentioned in the book that he probably never made a profit because he was too welcoming and too generous to people. But he was cooking a similar sort of food.
It's difficult with cookery books because there's a certain amount of aspiration in there.
Yes.
As with cookery books now, if you think of a modern cookery book that you might use, what percentage of recipes do you actually cook from there? It's close to 0% for most books, because they're often just coffee table books. But I guess the good thing about these books where it's written by somebody running a tavern is, okay, the person who's bought it might not be cooking those recipes. It might be aspirational for them, but those were actually being cooked.
Yes. I think in Briggs you can see he's a cook.
Yeah.
You can see that his description, he hasn't taken the recipes. He sometimes takes them word for word, but you can see he knows what he's talking about. He knows how to cook, and Farley's similar. So these people do know what they're doing, but I think because they were not writers, they might not probably didn't even know how to structure a recipe. In fact, the recipe is quite often not structured at all. It just says, make this sauce and put it with some cauliflower. You have to go and look up the sauce. It's they're difficult, but they're interesting characters.
Moving on to the big one, dinner time.
Yes.
We've skirted around the subject. You could have written a whole book just on dinner time.
Yes.
Did you get bogged down in dinner time?
Yes.
I imagine you did.
I think the structure of the book is working through the day. In a way, it wasn't rod for my own back because, some of these things don't fit. So I had to hammer them into some places. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I reckon you definitely chose the right structure.
Yeah.
Because at least it makes sense, even though, for dinner time, it suddenly splays out to several parts of the day.
It does.
Let's talk a little bit about the establishments somebody might go for their dinner. That's probably the best way to do it, rather than looking at a particular time. Terms are thrown around.
Yes.
There's taverns, there's alehouses, cook shops, chop houses, ordinaries.
Yeah.
And I think for most people, and it certainly was for me, probably until I started looking again at Elizabeth Raffald's book, it's kind of sort of just antiquarian words that's sort of interchangeable.
Yeah.
But that's not quite the case. They're all serving rather different people.
Yes.
We can't talk about all of these different ones.
No.
Let's go with the chop house, because that's quite a familiar term. I guess the clue is in the name to some degree. You're going to be having some chops.
Yeah.
But how would you describe a chop house? The clientele, the menu, that sort of thing.
So a chop house, there obviously, with all restaurants, there are different grades of them. So there were different grades of chop houses.
Yes.
But in my mind, a chop house, if you went to a chop house, it would look a bit like a coffee house. You would sit in a booth probably, maybe share a table with other people, maybe a curtain booth, somewhere to hang your hat. You would order food that would cook to order. I think that's the key thing. So you would cook things that could be fried or griddled and things like that. So you would order chops, steaks, things like that. I don't think necessarily many chop houses would have a roast going most of the day. I may be wrong there. But you could order, say you ordered a mutton chop, and it would come with some vegetables. Maybe you could get a soup before. Maybe you could get a deal. You paid for a meal which was a soup, a chop and some vegetables, a bottle of sometimes a whole bottle of wine for one person, a bottle of sherry sometimes, a beer, and maybe a pudding. Literally a pudding, a steamed. It seems to be always a pie or a steamed pudding. Yeah. Well, why not? One of my favourite things.
Indeed, me
so
too.
I think it's cooked to order rather than made dishes. We can't go into made dishes at the moment, but I think that would be the difference. A cook shop essentially would be where you went and bought takeaway hot food to don't eat at home. But unfortunately, there were cook shops that had rooms you could eat in. So they were probably a bit more down market. And you certainly in the East End, you would find more cook shops for people to stand up and eat in a back room or take home, whereas the chop houses may be more in the city where people needed something quick if they were in the middle of the day working, something like that. So those are the probably differences there. Cook shop is sort of a bit down market.
Yeah.
Cheaper and maybe takeaway.
I see.
And then ordinaries, you mentioned, are my favourite. So an ordinary evolved out of a French idea where people sat at a communal table and there was no menu. You just got what was on offer for that meal. So they were originally French ordinaries, but an ordinary was where they had a set meal at a set time and there was no choice, and you sat at a table and it might cost you 1 and 6pence for the standard thing, really. It would be soup and a beef a la mode, a stew of some description, and a pudding and a bottle of something. You might need to book, and there are records of people having to book. On a Sunday, you could go, like we go out for a Sunday roast at a pub in the country, you could go to a Sunday ordinary somewhere like Hampstead, somewhere like Clapham Common. You could book and you'd turn up and there might be a long table and you'd all sit down and somebody would come out of the kitchen with a pile of plates, dump them in front of one poor person who had to dish up the soup, because it would always start with soup.
Yes.
And then if there was another sitting within an hour, they'd be bringing out the next course as quickly as possible. There's records of people having almost riots over the best bits of the meat that was being cut up. Then you would have your pudding and then you'd be chucked out and you got a cheapish meal and a little trip out into the countryside for your 1 and 6, 2 and 6. Unpredictable. There were some that were terrible, no doubt, and some that were wonderful.
Yes.
I'd love to go in one and see what it was like, but I imagine there's quite a lot of food poisoning going on, which I don't have time to talk about in the book, but yeah.
We have to mention turtle soup and mock turtle soup. That's one of the quintessential Georgian dishes. It's called turtle soup. It's a whole extravaganza, really, isn't it? I remember I lived in St. Louis briefly back in my science days, and I'd really got into the food history at this point.
Yes.
It was beginning to take over my life, and there was an amazing shop, Global Food Stores. You could buy live turtles for the table.
Were they sea turtles or were they sort of like snappers,
No, they were.
Oh my goodness.
They were big old turtles.
Oh my goodness.
And you could even buy the sort of chopped up bits of turtle in the sort of meat section, covered in cellophane. You go and cook it. I remember thinking, this is probably the only opportunity I'm going to get to make turtle soup. But I chickened out.
Oh, I bet.
I'm pretty gung-ho about food, but for some reason, a turtle, something magical and ancient about a turtle. I'm not sure if I want to eat one.
No. I saw some turtles in Greece. I swam with turtles. I couldn't possibly eat them.
No, I don't know why. A cow is fine, pig, or game. Most game is fine, but not turtle.
I think the worrying thing about the recipes is they start with a live turtle. I think that's what the recipes start with. Yeah. And we're sitting bang in the middle of the City of London right now.
We are.
This was the centre of turtle soup eating, and in fact Wood Street, about 100 yards, 50 yards from where we're sitting, there were turtle soup sellers just there.
Yeah, really. Yes, it's one of the things where it's a diverse animal when it comes to the different types of meat it offers. People would often say, was this certainly bit of the calapash.
Calapash and callipee.
That's right. It tastes sort of like veal, this bit sort of bit like ham. So it was a an amazing range of textures and flavours just from a single animal. And then, of course, the blood would be used to make a sauce and all that kind of thing. But they liked those turtles a little bit too much, didn't they?
Yes, I think, I mean, particularly in the City of London, again, we're sitting next door to the Guildhall, where every single year at the Lord Mayor's banquet they had turtle soup. And in fact, they liked it so much that they endangered the turtles. And you could say that mock turtle soup comes about because it was cheaper. You used veal or head or something to make your mock turtle soup. It's interesting that there's advertisements in the Georgian newspapers where somebody says, we can make turtle soup to order, but you need 6 hours notice, because it was a long process. Delivered to your house, which is, remarkable, or they could come to your house and make it at your house. So it was a long process. It's not just the fact that the turtles were imported live from the West Indies and had to be stored in the basements. Terrible. So that would be expensive. But if you're spending 6 hours making something, and I've never untangled why pastry cooks made turtle soup.
Yeah, that was strange.
I actually asked Ivan Day. I asked Ivan Day, have you, because he's into pastry cooks.
Yes.
Have you any idea? He's no idea why soup and pastry cooks go together. I can only think they're technically difficult, and it takes skill.
Yes, you need a certain kind of mind and skill set to tackle them both. Mock turtle soup that I have made.
Okay, what was it like?
It was good. I made it when my little restaurant was open.
Yes,
I got a phone call from my butcher saying somebody's ordered a calf's head, but I can't for the life of me find out who it was who ordered it. Was it you? You're the kind of person who would have.
Yeah.
I said no. But if you can't find the person, let me know and I'll have it. And he gave it to me for a £5.
Okay.
So I made Eliza Acton's mock turtle soup for the restaurant. It took me 2 days, and I think about 3 people ordered it.
Oh my goodness! They probably thought it had turtle in it, didn't they?
Yeah. Actually, I have to say the people were. I did snipe at one point. I did all sorts of things, lots of offal. And despite what people tell you, people are pretty gung-ho still about these things. They will try it. But I think I went a bit far with
one step too far. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a fascinating book. I've really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, and it's a beautiful object in itself.
Well, I just like to say something about Bodleian Library Publishing. I chose them because I know somebody who'd had a book published by them. I thought, this is a beautiful book. It's properly stitched, it's properly bound, it's beautiful paper, and the type is beautiful. So they were the first people I approached, thinking I'd have to approach 100 publishers, They said yes immediately. And they have we've produced a beautiful book. And the paper's lovely. The print is lovely. The binding's lovely. I'm really pleased. So thanks to Bodleian Library Publishing for producing such a beautiful book.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful thing. It's time to wrap up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the Guildhall Library to have this conversation.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating.
It's been lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much, Peter. There are lots of links in the show notes to Peter's book, more information about the Guildhall Library, and Peter's excellent street food exhibition, plus those books by Richard Briggs, John Farley, and Julie Lehman that were mentioned, plus my recipe for mock turtle soup. Please visit the accompanying blog post or go to my social media to see that Gilray cartoon set in Kelsey's that we discussed. There's also a list of pertinent podcast episodes if your interest has been piqued. There's that episode about Elizabeth Raffald with me and Alessandra Pino. There's 18th Century Dining with Ivan Day, 18th Century Tavern Cooking with Mark Meltonville, or how about London Street Food Sellers with Charlie Taverner. Peter is going to be back on the podcast in a couple of episodes' time, where he and I will be looking at and talking about some of the treasures of the Guildhall Library. It's almost time to go. Please support the podcast by leaving a review and giving it a rating, 5 stars if you can, please, on your favourite podcast app. If you can support the podcast and blog financially, I would be ever so grateful. If you go to the blog, you can donate a one-off virtual coffee or pint, or start up a monthly £3 subscription. That's about $4.50. To get access to the secret podcast, bonus blog posts, a monthly newsletter, and more. Everything I receive goes towards making more and better content. Go to britishfoodhistory.com and click on the Support the Blog and Podcast tab, where you can find out about all of the benefits of becoming a subscriber. The sound engineering and mixing was done by Thomas Dinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast. Right, it's time to go now. Until next time, cheerio.